Alrighty, welcome everyone to the first CS50 seminar of the year. We today will be talking about how you set up Hue light bulbs to, use all the fancy features that Hues actually have. So we can control Hue light bulbs via the web, and with that, change the color of the bulb, turn on the bulb and turn them off, and do all sorts of other fancy features. So what we're going to actually do today is build a little web app that controls one of these bulbs and turns it on, turns it off, and is able to change its color. So first and foremost, I'm going to assume, if you guys are watching this, that you have access to this, which is a Philips Hue bridge. It is the thing that is actually going to be controlling these bulbs and is essentially just a wireless router that has some extra features built in. So the first thing we need to do to make this work, and again, I'm assuming that you have the hardware, but nothing actually set up. So to get it working on Harvard Wi-Fi, you need to grab your Hue bridge, plug it into your wall, wherever that is, so to the Ethernet. Obviously, have it plugged in so it has power. And then you need to go to the fast auto-reg page, so autoreg.fast.harvard.edu, sign in, and then register the new bridge for the internet. So I got logged out, so I'll just quick log in. And let's actually register this bridge. So to register a bridge, you need the MAC address, which is the bottommost line of numbers on this on the bridge. So it's at the very bottom by the Ethernet port. And it starts with 00:17: such and such. So I'm just going to quickly type that in so we can actually use this on the Harvard internet. And we'll go from there. All right, so we've registered it. So now it can actually access the internet. And when it finally actually manages to access the internet, this light that's flashing will stop flashing and just be solid blue. But until that happens, we can just wait. And the other thing we're going to need to do is actually register this bridge with Philips Hue. So Philips is the company that makes the bridge. So we need to actually go and register for an account. So I'm going to do that here too. All right, and as we can see, the third light has now turned on, so we're all the way there. So you sign in. Now you just activate the bridge by clicking on the button in the middle. And he realizes that, hey, you've actually registered this. So we now have this on Hue, so it actually realizes that it exists. Now we can start doing some more interesting things. So we have this. Now we want to actually create a website, or a web app rather, that lets us control these bulbs. So first, every time you use Hue bulbs, they actually need to be turned on. So there actually has to be power going to them. You can then tell them to turn off. So the light will be off, but there'll still be power going to it. So this, if I actually use a light switch how it's normally used, it isn't actually all that useful because you can't turn it on if there's no power going to it at all. So we're just going to have this on and hopefully not staring you guys in the face for the next few steps. OK, so to actually control these bulbs, we need to use what's called the Philips Hue API. So an API is called an application program interface. So it's essentially a way to access and control data on a system that isn't necessarily yours. So this light bulb uses an API, so it has its own system that has all sorts of fancy things in it, like it's a Zigbee wireless system. We don't actually have to know. All we need to know is how to interact with this API, this application program interface. And so if we can talk to that, we can do everything we need to do. And how we actually are going to talk to it is by using web requests, just like we did for this last problem set. So how we get started is we, again, register for this. We did need to do a fair bit of registering to actually get started using the Hue, but and hopefully this actually exists. I agree. And can I actually read that? Good. Alrighty, cool. So email address. Okay. That's now password stuff because of course there is. I need uppercase letters. Cool. All right. So we have gotten in, or we're about to. I think we're in. OK, cool. So we're in. So the API documentation that we're on now is going to be your best friend if you're trying to do anything useful with these bulbs. Basically, it'll tell you how to get started using these bulbs, how to change the lights to whatever color you want, how to create groups, which isn't all that important right now because we're only going to be talking about a single bulb. But if you, say, have multiple bulbs, it is very handy, and all sorts of things. So to get started, we'll go to their Getting Started page, surprise, and to actually check if we are, in fact, getting everything working, we can see you can use this link, meethue.com/API/NUPNP. I don't know what all the letters are supposed to stand for, but we can find a list up here of all the bridges on this network. Luckily, I know which bridge is ours, which is the first one, because we haven't bothered to change the name of it yet, so it's just starting as Philips Hue. But we have all sorts of interesting things here. We have its IP address, which we're going to be accessing pretty soon. We have its MAC address, which we used earlier. And we have its name, but that doesn't matter to us in the least. So how we actually go about interacting with these bulbs is we use this IP address, and we also go to, /debug/clip.html. So debug/clip.html. So there we go. We have this nice, relatively nice interface, so we can actually talk to the bridge right here to figure out, OK, which lights are connected to this? Are they on? That sort of thing. So there's a few steps to actually getting this started. So right now, as we can see, the debugger looks just like this page that it has. Again, I can't stress this enough. This developer.meethue.com, incredibly useful if you're actually interacting with these bulbs. So if we actually want to walk through, what this debugger looks like, it gives us a URL to interact with, a set of methods we can use, a message body, and then we'll get back some sort of response from the client, which is the bridge. So just like we did for this last problem set, right, where we have, instead of using telnet, we're just using this interface, but we're still using a GET request to a certain absolute path with a certain body. And the body in this case is actually just going to be our query. So let's walk through how we actually get to using this. So if we say go here, and so 1234 is an unauthorized user. You have to set up, again, another user for this bridge. So that's fun. We have a lot of users that we have to set up. So we're going to call ourselves new developer. But again, if we get that, that doesn't work. We actually have to go about and post with the body device type, test user, and username new developer to the API of the bridge. So let's see if I have that exactly right. Yes, bridge IP address. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry about that. So it's actually visible, always handy. So to actually create a new user, we put in the message body, device type, test user, username, new developer, and we post this. Except this doesn't work because we haven't pressed the big button in the middle. So if we press the button in the middle and do that again, we have our new user in. It's very handy. OK, so now that we have our new developer, we can start getting information about ourselves. So we have that there is apparently 3 lights hooked up to this bridge. This is because all bridges come with a starter kit, and they have 3 lights automatically. And it has all the information about all these lights. So light 1, which again isn't actually this light bulb, so that's not all that handy, is apparently on state off. So each light, let's actually just run through this. New developer / lights / get. So if we look at each of these lights, we can get their name if we just look at the lights as a whole. Then we can also look at each light and its state. So if we get its state's not available because it's not plugged in. But OK, so if we want to actually connect this light to this bridge, we need to use a program, and I need to download it because I forgot about this, called Lamp Stealer, which Philips Hue actually already built for us. It's very helpful. So if we download that, opening in 4 seconds, 0, there we go. OK, open up Lamp Stealer, and we agree. We find the bridge. We know which MAC address we have, which is the thing on the back. So 8809 F2E0, we find that. And to actually make Lamp Stealer work, you put the light bulb against the bridge and hit start linking. It'll flash to say that it's working. And we have the light bulb. OK. So once we've done that, to actually connect that bulb to our light, we use post. So we go API / new developer / lights, hit post. That'll find any new lights that we have. And then, oops, What just happened? OK, there we go. And then if we hit get, we now have a fourth light bulb, which is the bulb that we actually just added on. So now if we go for light/4/state and get that, I might actually not be doing the right thing when I ask for state. So let's go Philips Hue API, lights/lights gets us all the different lights. Get new lights. We already did that. We search for lights. So, oh, OK. We don't actually have to go to state to get the lights. So it's just light/4/get. OK, so interestingly, this says that this fourth bulb that we just added is off. And that's because we haven't actually done anything with it yet. So if you just plug in a bulb to a light socket and don't try and manipulate it using Hue, it'll just assume that it's probably off. We need to actually tell it that it wants to be on, either on or off. So we just give it the body on, quotes, :true, or false, if we want to actually see it do something. And we put that, and we have the light off. If we want it to turn back on, we put that, light turns back on. So that's fancy, right? We're controlling a light bulb all through the internet. Obviously, we can do better. So if we want to do something more interesting, like change the color that it is, we can also do that, where now it's a sort of shade of green. If we want it to be red, we can do that. Anyway, very nice, right? So that's the first step, right? We have this light set up so we can actually do things with it. What if we then want to actually create a website that can control this light bulb? So conveniently, I've written sort of the going to make this bigger so we can actually see. I guess there we go. OK, so what's that? OK. So I've built a little sample website that will actually be able to control this light bulb with once we add all the actual features that we're going to need. So here's what it looks like right now. It's kind of hideous, and it also doesn't do anything. So there's a couple bad things right there. Ugly and doesn't do anything. But we can make it better, and we are going to make it better. So quick aside, we're going to talk about a couple things here. JavaScript, which is a language we haven't talked about yet in the class, and Ajax, which is a use of JavaScript that we haven't talked about in the class, not surprisingly, because we haven't talked about JavaScript. So we're going to need both of these things. So JavaScript is what's known as a client-side language. So basically, it's a language that runs on the client server, or like on the client's machine. So it's running. So if a, say, website uses JavaScript, it's your computer running the JavaScript. Unlike PHP, where it's the server that runs the JavaScript and then tells your computer what to see, your computer is saying what it's going to see by running the JavaScript itself. So it's a server, or it's a client-side language, and it runs completely independently of the website, basically. So we're going to use JavaScript, which is basically the only thing that we want to use because I don't actually have this site up on the web, right? It's just on my own computer. We don't want it to connect to the web at all. We're just, running it. And we're also going to use this thing called Ajax. So Ajax is it stands for asynchronous JSON and XML, and is basically a way for a part of your web page to talk to the internet. So if we say when we click on this button to talk to our API, so to talk to our bridge, and say we want to change the color to whatever I've typed in here, we can do that using Ajax. It's fairly straightforward, and we'll obviously go into more detail as we actually write some code for it. But are we feeling OK about it so far? OK, ask me questions if not. Alrighty, so I've created here this website. We're including here a call to jQuery, which is just a library of a bunch of handy JavaScript functions. We'll talk about that in more detail in the future. And then inside this script tag, I've created a sort of wrapper function, which will just get called once the website is finished loading. And then I've built some basic descriptors of functions, change color, and toggle. So what toggle is going to do is just turn this light on and off, and change color is going to change the color of the light bulb. So far, so good? Okie doke. So I've also included on here, inside the actual HTML part of the page, a description or a on-click tag, or an attribute rather, which calls change color. And this on-click calls toggle. So if we want to, say, just make it obvious that these are actually doing something, so ideally, on-click is getting called if I hit that, and on-click is getting called if I hit that. But to actually make it explicit, we can use the console, which is a handy thing for JavaScript, and .log. So it's just like using printf, basically. And we'll just give it change color. And we can do the same thing for toggle. OK, so we reload the page. And then if we open up the console and click, oops, that was unexpected. Don't mind me. OK, let's see. There we go. So if I hit submit, right, it knows that it's calling change color. If I hit toggle, it knows that it's calling toggle. Right? So far, so good. Basically, this on-click here is just a way of saying to the website that when I click this, I want you to call the function change color. How are we feeling? Good so far? All right. So if we actually want to talk to the API, so to talk to these lights, we need to know the IP address, which we found earlier, and how we're actually going to talk to them. So if we want to just talk about this again, or use this again, so API/new developer /lights/for/state, or I guess light/for, we'll just call a get request, and we get all this stuff. So, right, we can see that if we call using the web a get request of this address, we'll get back all this information. So we can do gets that way very easily, right? Basically, everything we do over the web these days is using gets as the method. Using put is much harder, right? It's confusing because that isn't something that the web is built to handle anymore. Luckily, if we use Ajax, we can just tell it what method we want. We don't have to rely on how the web works these days. So if we want to use Ajax, we simply do $, and so this is using the jQuery library, .ajax, and we pass Ajax a body. So I think we give it method equals put. Let's see, URL equals that slash state, and we give it the body of, and so the body that we want to give it, right, is the same thing we gave here of just hue followed by some number if we want to change that color to that number. So it's just going to be as simple as hue colon. And we're going to start with a fixed number, and we'll talk about how we'll change that in the future. And semicolon. Yeah, and that should be enough. We'll want to actually check to see if that works, but we can try it. So, and it did not. Okay, so bear with me for a second as I open the recent file that I might have done all the work on a second ago. Scratch examples, button.js. I guess I want color.js. Okay, to get the IP address. Light states on true hue. Oh, data, not body. That was it. Oops. Okay, and crap. So this is a little embarrassing, obviously. And of course that closed on itself again. So we put at that URL our data of hue. Oh, right, and data, the whole thing needs to be in a string. There we go. So much better. Okay, so debugging on the fly, not the best, but did the job. So let's quickly talk about what just happened. So we're calling this Ajax call. We're giving it the method put, right? We're calling it to this URL, which happens to be the IP address of my Hue bulb, right? It's the same IP address we had up here. Passing it API/new developer /lights/for/state, just like we did inside the debug mode. And then we give it the body of Hue 2500. So if we wanted to go back and forth, we can put this one to red. We can put this one to green, this to red, this to green, and so on, right? Obviously, that isn't that impressive yet, though, because we have this fixed color, right? We can only change this to green. Luckily, with JavaScript, you can actually figure out what is going on your page. So we can figure out the inner values of this text box. So that's kind of neat. And then the other thing we still need to do that we haven't done yet is actually have our on and off switch. So which do we want to do first? On-off switch or actually get colors? Actually get colors? Sounds good. OK, so all we need to do here is figure out what the actual value inside of this box is. So 25500. And we can do that using JavaScript. It's very handy. So we're going to quickly use this console. So I'll make that bigger too, and talk about how we actually get things. And then we'll go into basically copying that code over again. So jQuery, again, how you access things on a page using jQuery. Again, it's a great library for JavaScript. You first use a $, which says I'm using the jQuery library. Then you pass it a set of parens, which is basically the function body. And then you give it a string that represents something. So I'm going to quickly do this, and then we'll talk about what that actually means. OK, so I give it this hash switch, which is the ID. Oh, sorry. I don't want to give it switch because that's the checkbox. But you can give it the ID of whatever instance you want, or the whatever thing you want to look at. So instead of hash switch, I want to give it hash numbers. And this gives us this text box, right? So let's see. I think just value. Nope. And well, so .text. What's that? Yeah, I think that's the one I actually want. Because so .text would give us the inner text in HTML, but that isn't, yeah, this .val is what we want. So .text would give us the inner HTML, but because this isn't inner HTML, because we typed this in ourselves, we use .val, which is just the value given to whatever, and we can figure that out. So if we have this 2,500 that we can, or 255,000, no, 25,000 rather, because I can read numbers real well, we can figure out exactly what we put into this box, and we can use that. So number equals that. Hue equals, and we'll talk about what I'm doing here in just a second. OK, so basically, we get the number from the page using number equals $ of hash number dot val, and then we are inserting it into this string. So the plus sign in JavaScript just means string concatenation. So we have this string followed by this string followed by this string. And even though we think of 25,000 as a number, JavaScript can just interpret it as a string. So if we do that, and we give this, say, 0, we can change the color to red. If we give it 2,500 again, or 25,000 again, we can change it to green. And let's see, what's a good blue? Like 49,000, I think. Purple. So yeah, so far we can change.
What scale are the numbers?
So the numbers are weird in Hue bulbs. You might have noticed that this is sort of a not great green, right? It's not a very bright green that we have here. That is actually as good as hues get, because it's a number between 0 and 65,000, or 65,556. So whatever that is, it's, I think, 16 to the 4th? No, 16 to the 8th. So it's 8 hexadecimals in a row, basically. But it unfortunately doesn't, you can't just use hex notation as well as you could in other systems. So you actually have to convert that to actual numbers. But yeah, they're kind of odd. You actually, if you want a good sense of what they look like, look it up. Oops, and I just did something. There we go. But yeah, it's between 0 and 65,000 roughly, and you can get fairly decent sense of what colors want to be. So 46,000, I think, is actually the good blue. Nope, that's also. So other things I guess we should talk about on Hue bulbs is there's a bunch of different settings you can have for each of these bulbs. So we can have the hue, obviously. You can also include things like the saturation. So sat, which is just some number between 0 and 255. So if we want high saturation, I guess that is as high as the saturation goes. Oh, actually, need to. Yeah, that is as high as the saturation goes. Or, so if we, say, set it to a lower saturation, it'll be a less bright color. Not that it's all that bright as is. Or is that just not working? It's hard for me to tell from here. So. OK, yeah, right. So the saturation went down because I set the saturation to 100. Since I don't know, I kind of like colors, I'll leave it at 26,000 or 255. I don't know where 26,000 came from. And we can have it nice and dark. So how are we feeling? Able to change colors on some bulbs that we just took out of a box? Pretty good. The other thing we want to do is actually turn this thing on and off. So if we know how to do each of those things, right? It's easy enough to turn it off because we just use exactly this Ajax call. And instead of doing hue, we do on. And instead of any of this stuff, we just do false. And we can just, oops, unexpected token. What's that? No. Let's see, unexpected token period. Where's the period? Yeah, not what I meant to click. All right. Oh, $. There we go. All right, there we go, much better. So if we just want to turn it off, right, we can turn it off. But now we can't turn it back on, so that's unfortunate. So if we switch it to true, obviously we can turn it on, but it'll just stay on when we click. We need some way of first checking whether it's on or off, and then either setting it to on if it's not on, or off if it's not off, right? So if we go back to our debug, we can get information about each bulb. Or if we go to light/4 rather, we can get each information about the bulb, right? We have that on equals true. We have that brightness equals 254. We have its hue. We have all this stuff. So if we actually want to get the information we want, for instance, this is the thing we actually care about, this on equals true, we can make an Ajax call to see what color it is, or not what color, whether it's on or not. And then once we have that information, make another Ajax call to either turn it off or turn it on. So let's talk about how we do this. So if we go up here, again, our URL was the IP address, so 10.245.12.175 /API/new developer /lights/4, and we use the method get. So if we actually want to just do that, just getting the information alone, we are already there, right? We can get the information just with that. But we want to do something with that information. And this is something that Ajax is kind of interesting on, in that because it's asynchronous, if I just made this call and then immediately checked what that was supposed to return, it would fail, right? Because Ajax is asynchronous, that means it just sends off a call somewhere else in space, and it's going to return when it's ready to return, but it's not going to wait. You shouldn't wait around for it, basically. So you can actually, in this Ajax call, make a call for when it's successful. So when it finishes, you can tell it what to do. So on success, you give it a function. So function boot, and I guess it takes data. So if we have this function that we're going to call on data, or when it successfully returns, and it'll return some data, which is this response that I just showed you. It's this whole thing. We want to look at the data, the success or the state field of the data, and then the on field of that state field. Does that make sense so far? OK, so because we are dealing with JavaScript, this is actually pretty easy. So let's just do this. So this is just doing, again, that same print that we did earlier. We'll just console.log of data.state.on, and we'll see what we get back. So this isn't going to end up changing anything. It'll just print true for us, if it works. OK, so let's inspect element so we get our console out. And that did nothing. Did I hit refresh? I might not have. Nope, that didn't do the thing I was hoping it would do. And I apologize for the confusion for all of this. Let's see. Is it quotes? So I've been dealing with a fairly wide set of languages lately, and all of them deal with objects slightly differently. So it's possible that JavaScript treats it as associative arrays, and no such luck. OK, so going back to my previously written code, because obviously I'm going to need to fall back on that again. Function tags. Oh, we don't return it in a string. OK, the one time that it isn't a string is when it gets me. OK. And this should be .state.on. OK. Figures. OK, and there we go. So the success field on Ajax, apparently, and I forgot this, obviously, doesn't take a string like the rest of the fields do. It just has whether or not, or basically, you actually pass in the function that you wanted to call on return. So does this make sense why this works? So we're calling Ajax. So we're calling off to the internet with the method get. So we're saying we're going to use the get method, just like we did for problem set 6. We're calling to this URL, which is the lights slash the 10, 20, 245, 12, 175 slash API slash new developer slash lights slash 4. And we're calling when it succeeds and returns whatever body, console.log of data. And so we log the data.state.on. So the on field of the state field of data, which, looking back here, is the state field of data and the on field of the state field, which is true. So if we have this get, right, we know whether or not this bulb is on or not. Then we can figure out if we're going to turn it on or turn it off, right? Because if it's false, we turn it on. If it's true, we turn it off. So let's make another line here so we can make it a little more obvious what we're doing. So if data.state.on, so in that case, we know that our light bulb is on. We want to turn it off. Let's talk about, so how are we going to turn it off? Change the state. Change the state using Ajax, just like we did before. We'll move that over one. And instead of having all this extra stuff, we'll just turn it off. So on equals false. And we'll tab this over also. OK. So that's if it's on. We call Ajax and turn it off. If it's off, what is the guess of what we were going to want to do? Yep. Or so if on is false. So we want to set on to true. So else on true. And that should do us. All right, let's try it out. What are the bets on it working first try? Not good? Not good? All right, let's try it. So turned off, turned on. It doesn't actually have the checkbox right for on versus off, but you know, you can't win everything. OK. So that's pretty close to everything we need to talk about. Since we can turn it on, we can turn it off, we can change the color.
And I'm sorry, there was a question online. Is it possible that you're missing an HTML tag in your HTML?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm missing one at the bottom and the top.
Sorry about it.
Who sent me? Or who sent that?
Interested viewer.
I see. Yeah, I totally was missing that. Of course, it doesn't make any real difference to whether it works or not.
Well, for validity's sake.
But for validity's sake, you need to have the HTML tag around everything. But yeah, so we have this. Everything's working fine. Little tips and tricks. If you want, so you might have noticed that this goes about or moves kind of slowly, right? So if we go to 0, submit, right, it turns kind of slowly. If you want that to be faster, you use the transition time field. So transition time of, and if you just give it 0, so 0 milliseconds. Oh yes, I do have an extra S in there. Thank you. We can make it turn instantly. I don't think it matters, quite so much for the colors because you know transitioning kind of slowly and colors kind of looks nice. But with the on and off, this really slow turn on, turn off time is not all that impressive. So if you use transition time of 0 there, that's a little nicer in general, according to me. Yeah. So, oops, that's interesting. In any case, there's still a couple of bugs in how this actually works. So notice that this turned on but didn't turn on bright. For some reason, if you use a shorter transition time than the automatic one or like the default, it doesn't turn on bright unless you tell it to. I don't know why. It's something to do with the bulbs, or like the way the Hue bulbs work. But to fix that, you just change the brightness to 255 when you turn it on. So, oops. Ah, I closed that accidentally. Oh well, luckily we're done. So, there we go, see, nice and bright. Alrighty, so, how are we feeling? Feel like we could set up a Hue bulb application? Cool. Alrighty, thanks guys.